Hey guys, what is up and welcome to a new Tesla update video. So today, as per usual, let's go over Tesla stock, let's go over the market, let's talk about what is happening to Tesla, what we can expect moving forward and all that good stuff. So if you enjoy, again, don't forget to hit that like button. This is not financial advice and I am not a financial advisor. And of course, if you enjoy my technical analysis, thoughts on the charts, updates, etc. Well, again, I do share my thoughts, post updates with my members every single day as the market is trading. So definitely check that out. That link, of course, is down below for just $3 a month. That's all it is for all my Tesla updates, options, flow, technical analysis, etc. $5 adds NVDA to that as well. $7 also adds non-Tesla, non-NVIDIA stocks that I share charts with updates, etc. In the YouTube membership section, which of course the link to that is down below. And every single weekend, I do chart requests with members over on Discord for tier 3 members. But jumping into it, Tesla. Closing the day up, a respectable amount, just over 2%, closing at pretty much $309 per share, which compared to the market, arguably a little bit of an underperformance. I mean, the market up, Q's, for instance, in this case, up about 2% on the day, and Tesla up only about just over 2%, definitely could have been a better day. Now, the markets are in a pretty interesting situation here, I'm not going to lie. So we're going to see how the market reacts here, because there is potential for this very quickly to be a small little dead cat bounce, right? Because we had a significant drop, right? We had a significant drop in the markets, and the markets were very extended to the downside for the most part, like almost too quickly, if that makes sense. There is a chance that this could be almost like a little bit of a rising wedge, the kind of rising bear flag back into a kind of the reset motion, if you will. Also into the Fibonacci's, if you will, too. If I take the Fibonacci's from here to here, you can see we're approaching the 618 fibs on the Q's, for instance, right? So there is a chance that this little push up that we're getting in the markets, into, let's say, tomorrow or like maybe Wednesday, to one of these Fibonacci's, there is a possibility this is just simply a dead cat before potentially continuing one more leg lower, in my opinion. Again, just my opinion. If we do head lower, closer to the 50 EMA, I think a retest of previous all-time highs sitting somewhere around right here. For instance, for Q's, around 540 or something like that. For SPY, for instance, that would be closer to about, almost $600, about $610. Would be my kind of target if, of course, this ends up being a little bit of a dead cat and we end up making one more low that looks something like this, right? So again, we'll take it day by day, but just something worth mentioning, right? In the broader, broader market, I guess you can say. So let's see how that transitions into, things moving forward. And then we have the VIX kind of hanging on here, but you can see arguably getting a bit of a breakout here. So let's see if it can continue holding the sort of 17.5 to 18 or so region in the days to come. Because again, if the VIX starts showing strength, that can show potential weakness, at least short term, for the markets. But again, overall, I think the markets are pretty bullish. It's just, especially with the MACD now making lower lows on the histogram. Let's see if this amounts to a little bit of a deeper pullback again. Like I said, one more fresh low. And then from there, I think we probably, retest all-time highs. And as long as nothing crazy happens, most likely just continue back upwards. But again, one step at a time. And I bring that up because, that can potentially affect Tesla for better or for worse, right? So let's continue monitoring the market there and seeing how that actually overall shapes up to be. But for Tesla specifically, There was bullish news this morning about Elon's compensation plan. Tesla themselves released a note saying how about a third of his pay is going to be granted, and it was good news. Tesla was up pretty much about 2% actually pre-market, and it pretty much closed exactly where it opened pre-market, right? You can see that pretty much getting a flat doji, if you will, candle today, showing some level of indecision. But it would have been nice to see stronger strength, if you will, off of this kind of movement and news, if you will. So the fact that we're kind of ending in a sort of flat-ish scenario here, if you will, relative to the open, it could have been better. It could have been better. It could have been worse, but it could have been better. So let's start off with the 1 hour very quickly, right? Now, what happened on the 1 hour time frame? Actually, hold on. Before I do that, let me go ahead and I don't like when this is on different time frames that I don't want it to be on. Let me go ahead and remove that. There we go. Going to the 1 hour quickly, right? You can absolutely make a bit of an argument that we did break out of this very deep sort of, kind of falling wedge, if you will, right? Which is not looking too bad. And we could be setting up a bit of a rising triangle pattern on the 1 hour, small little rising triangle pattern. So we could get one more pop up a little bit higher, into tomorrow, maybe 313, 315, something like that potentially. But that's like short term. Again, this is all short term, right? This is just maybe the next day or two, right? What we care about is, well, where are we actually overall going? Like, where the hell is the stock actually going to go? Like, is this finally going to start heading up anywhere meaningfully higher, like high 300s, maybe 400, or is it finally going back down to like, 240, 250, right? Like, where is it ultimately going to go? Because it hasn't been doing anything for like a while now, right? Like almost 2 months, I think it is, right? Pretty much just flat, sideways, doing like nothing. So Let's go to the 4-hour here really quickly, right? So what is the 4-hour suggesting? Well, the 4-hour does have the SMI near the bottom. I would have liked to see it a little bit lower. I personally like to see the SMI breach below the green line, and that's kind of like back here, and that's where I really like to look for potential opportunities. So we're not really at that stage just yet. We're not at the stage where I'm like super excited about it just yet personally, but it's pretty close to it. So, we'll see how that shapes up. But the main thing is the fact that we could be in this kind of 4-hour sort of falling wedge-ish, if you will, type pattern that's setting up over here, where you can see, it's getting a pretty deep decline, but, we're also kind of making, almost equal lows here, just slightly lower lows, but almost equal lows, but nonetheless setting up what looks to be a bit of a wedge pattern, which, depending on how things go, we can continue kind of consolidating, maybe even the majority of this week within this wedge, anywhere between as high as pretty much, again, about that 312, 313 range down to potentially retesting about 300 once again, as we continue consolidating. And then from there, we'll have to see which way it breaks out. Does it break out to the upside, or does it finally break to the downside? So this is something else I'll be monitoring in the days to come overall, but, this could still take a few more days to play out, especially if we get a little bit of red coming in, let's say as early as tomorrow and or Wednesday, right? Because then we'll have a little bit of extra room kind of around this general vicinity right here to kind of play around a bit before we actually get a breakout in a direction. So we'll continue monitoring that as well on the 4-hour time frame, including, of course, the SMI. Personally, if I ever see Tesla, if I see the SMI essentially underneath the green zone here and curling, kind of like what it did over here, which could happen again if we revisit closer to 290, for instance, or maybe if we slowly bleed back down to the top or to the bottom of this kind of, wedge, if you will, that we're in, that's where I'll start getting a bit more excited personally. Right now, it's kind of neutral, arguably even slightly bearish, I would argue, mainly because of the daily. So let's talk about the daily. So it's in a peculiar position. I'm not gonna lie, Tesla's in a very sort of limbo land here. It's not necessarily straight up bearish, but it's not straight up bullish by any means either. It's so flaccid, honestly, is the best way I can explain it. It's just very flaccid, right? So let me explain why that is. Well, on the I guess a more bullish perspective, right? We are technically near support. We're near that 300 support, which has been holding pretty well, all things considered, right? It hasn't closed, even a 1-hour candle under 300. So there is that positive sign, right? The fact that it's not closing underneath 300 so far, at least, is a good sign. Now, if it starts closing underneath $300 per share, like on a 1-hour or higher time frame, especially like on a daily, that's a concern. That to me means the fact that we most likely indeed have picked our direction, which is in that case going to be down. Now it's not going to be straight down. We'll have bounces in between, of course, but down. In that case, 270 down to 240 will be my targets. However, that's kind of that's if we break 300, but it's holding. The point I'm trying to make is the fact that it is actually holding pretty well, all things considered, especially on Friday, which is a good sign to see. So that's kind of like one perspective, right? Kind of the arguably slightly bullish, I guess you can say, perspective that that it's holding. It is holding, and you can even make an argument this was a bit of a false breakdown for sure, 100%. However, the downside, or I guess the more bearish perspective, or I guess more concerning perspective, is the fact that this really needs to get some momentum going, right? It doesn't have momentum is the problem. Like for this stock to, let's say, really make its way something, meaningfully higher, like, closer back to like, I don't know, 400 even, sometime in the next few months or whatever. There needs to be actual bullish momentum set up in the stock, but it's very flaccid. It's not necessarily straight up bearish, so I would argue it slightly leans bearish, mainly because, again, we're about to lose the exponential moving averages unless we get a pretty nice pump tomorrow, essentially, honestly, above like 315 at least, but ideally 320, and get back above these EMAs. They're about to get a full bearish crossover, right? The 9 already crossed the 50, which is the white line here, and the red line you can see is almost crossing the 50, right? If these start crossing below the 50, that is a bit of a concern. That tells me momentum is, it's falling, right? It's definitely falling. And then you have the MACD now not only back to red, but continuing to make lower lows, right? So I would like to see two things for me to really get, not necessarily straight up bullish, but, definitely starting to lean back to bullish, right? That would be back above the exponential moving averages. And I want to see, at the very least, the MACD start printing higher lows in the histogram, but even better will be back to green, right? Those would be the two nice signs to see, to start considering bullish outcomes and possibilities, which, of course, if that were to happen, then we can start talking about actually breaking out to the north side, the bullish side, if you will, from this pennant to the upside, right? But those aren't really conversations to really fully be had just yet, because, again, we're not only below the EMAs, but they're about to be fully bearishly crossed over, and MACD has yet to print a higher low. So, patience, unfortunately, for this one is still kind of due, in my opinion. So let's see how that plays out, right? This 4-hour pennant, or sorry, falling wedge, I should say, it could be a bit of an early tell to give us an early indication of maybe what to expect. But ultimately, again, we need to see the daily starting to show just some bullish momentum, right? It's just something, because it's really, again, it's so flaccid, right? It, again, slightly leads bearish because of the MACD and the EMAs, but it's not like overwhelmingly bearish either. Honestly, it's maybe slightly bearish, like 55% bearish, 45% bullish, maybe 60-40, something like that. It's not really overwhelming in either direction, which is why I keep saying it's just very neutral, very flaccid for the most part. So let's see, I want to see some bullishness. I want to see like a move back up and then like a bull flag and then a breakout or something. Like I want to see something like that, but we're just not getting anything like that. So until we see something more convincing, the stock is just going to continue being sort of kind of dead, honestly, right? Not really going in either direction, nothing meaningful, just sort of frustrating bulls and bears, honestly, at this point. So let's continue monitoring that overall. But I definitely am not a fan of potentially losing the full exponential moving averages, getting that full bearish crossover. So let's see how tomorrow goes, right? Let's see how tomorrow goes. Let's see if we get anything worthwhile overall. And then the final thing, of course, is going to be the weekly, right? The weekly, so far printing an inside week. Let's see how that shapes up to be. But you can see still also kind of more or less contained roughly within this pennant as well, with the MACD now actually making lower lows on the weekly last week and potentially even this week. The week just started, but so far, right? So again, a lot of things to monitor. It's a very, there's still a lot of pressure building up. I still think a larger move is absolutely on its way for Tesla stock, and we're just not there yet. And so far, we're potentially printing what I don't think the stock has ever done this before. I'm looking back at it really quickly here. I don't think it's done it not to this extent, at least. Got pretty close here, but even that wasn't really that much of it, right? But based on how this month goes, we just started August, we could be printing the third inside month candle in a row. As long as Tesla is contained pretty much between 290 to as high as pretty much 340, this could be the third inside monthly candle in a row. I don't think the stock has ever printed 3 in a row. Even 2 in a row is already pretty rare. 3 would be a pretty unprecedented amount of pressure and kind of coilage, if you will, if that's even a word. Coilage, is that a word? A lot of coiling in the price action is occurring here. Very tight. Big move is essentially building up, right? So let's continue monitoring that as well. There's a lot to monitor for a stock that's kind of doing nothing, honestly. But again, that's mainly because despite the stock not doing a whole lot, we're starting to enter and get closer to that apex moment where something is going to happen. Potentially this week, probably next week though, but something is building and something is going to explode one direction or the other soon. At some point, the pressure will have to get, lifted off, if you will. So let's continue monitoring all this, guys. But there's, again, a lot to monitor. In terms of options flow, take a quick look at options flow on Tesla stock. For the most part, bears did dominate today with higher bearish flow than bullish flow. Towards the end of the day, we did get some bearish put flow as well. They came in. You can see slightly overwhelming the bullishness, if you will, as well. Weekly puts especially, right? 0808, right? Some bullishness, of course, but definitely a little bit more bearishness than bullishness. But again, even in the options flow, I still wouldn't say it's like decisively one way or the other. It's even options flow it's kind of mixed. It's kind of mixed. So short term, what I would be watching for, 300 is probably the most important level. As long as Tesla's above 300, the bulls are definitely not out of the picture just yet, but they really need to like at least 315, man. Like at least like 313 to 315, like minimum, bare minimum. Ideally above 320, but obviously the best case scenario is just ultimately breaking out of the pennant. So yeah, let's continue monitoring those levels and seeing what ends up actually coming to fruition. But thanks for watching. See you tomorrow.